Mercedes may have found the gray area every Formula One rival is terrified of. Not an obvious illegal part. Not a clear rule breach. Something much more dangerous. A loophole that might be legal. And now the FIA is being dragged into the fight, because once one top team finds a space inside the regulations, every rival has the same fear. If this gets approved, we all have to chase it. That is why this story matters. The source connects the controversy to Mercedes, Red Bull, protest pressure, secret Silverstone parts, recent FIA decisions, curfew breach headlines, and the wider debate over how strictly the rules are being enforced. But it does not confirm that every rival has officially filed a protest. It does not reveal the full technical document. It does not prove a final FIA ruling. And that missing information is exactly what makes the paddock nervous. Because in Formula One, the most dangerous advantage is not always the one that breaks the rules. It is the one that survives them. If the FIA shuts the gray area down, the threat disappears. But if the FIA allows it, the entire grid gets a terrifying message. The line was not where they thought it was. And once that line moves, the development race changes overnight. So now the question is brutal. Did Mercedes find something the FIA will stop, or did they find the kind of legal loophole that every rival will be forced to copy? Subscribe to the channel. To understand why this first block matters, you have to understand the difference between breaking a rule and bending a rule so cleverly that the rest of the paddock cannot decide what to call it. That is where Formula One becomes dangerous. A clear illegal part is simple. The FIA checks it, the team changes it, and the story moves on. There may be anger. There may be headlines. But at least the answer is clean. A gray area is different. A gray area creates doubt. It creates debate. It creates fear. Because one team can say, this is allowed, and another team can look at the same thing and say, this was never meant to be allowed. That is the space Mercedes may now be accused of finding. Not a door wide open in the regulations. A crack. A tiny opening. The kind of opening that most teams might walk past, because it looks too risky, too unclear, or too political. But the best Formula One teams do not just read the rules like instructions. They read them like a map. They ask what is banned. Then they ask the more dangerous question. What is not banned? That question is where genius begins. And sometimes, it is where protests begin too. Because if Mercedes has found a regulation space that rivals did not see, the immediate problem for the paddock is not only performance. It is permission. If the FIA says no, the gray area closes. If the FIA says yes, the gray area becomes a pathway. And once it becomes a pathway, every rival has to decide whether to copy it, challenge it again, or risk falling behind. That is why rivals react so aggressively to unclear advantages. They are not only afraid of being beaten today. They are afraid of what happens tomorrow if the idea survives. Because a surviving gray area becomes a precedent. And precedent is one of the most powerful weapons in Formula One. A precedent tells teams where the line really is. It tells engineers how far they can push. It tells technical directors what arguments might work. It tells rivals whether their own cautious interpretation was too conservative. That is the hidden danger. A team may not gain a huge advantage from the first version of an idea. But if that first version survives FIA scrutiny, the second version can be stronger. The third version can be cleaner. The fourth version can be built into the entire concept of the car. That is how a gray area becomes a development direction. And that is exactly why rivals try to stop it early. Not after the idea becomes normal. Not after the team collects months of data. Not after every car on the grid has been forced to respond. Early. Before the gray area turns into a weapon. This is why the FIA becomes the center of the story. The governing body is not only checking whether a car part fits a rule. It may be deciding whether a new interpretation is allowed to exist at all. That is a heavy decision. Because the FIA has to protect two things that constantly fight each other. Innovation. And fairness. If the FIA is too strict, teams will say the sport is killing clever engineering. They will argue that Formula One is supposed to reward the people who read the regulations better, build smarter solutions, and find performance others missed. But if the FIA is too relaxed, rivals will say the sport is rewarding loopholes. They will argue that one team is stretching the spirit of the rules until the rulebook no longer means what it was supposed to mean. Both sides can sound reasonable. That is what makes gray areas so explosive. There is no simple villain. Mercedes, or any top team using a gray area, can argue that the design is legal because the rule does not forbid it. Rivals can argue that the same design violates the intention behind the rule, even if the wording leaves space. And the FIA has to decide which argument defines the sport. That is why a gray area is more dangerous than an obvious illegal part. An illegal part gets removed. A gray area can change the rulebook without changing a single word. That sounds strange, but it happens through interpretation. The FIA may not rewrite the regulation immediately. It may simply clarify how it should be read. And once that clarification exists, every team adjusts. That clarification can open a door, or close one. It can protect Mercedes, or limit them. It can give rivals relief, or force them into a new development race. That is why the paddock becomes nervous before the full ruling appears. Because every possible answer has consequences. If the FIA blocks the idea, rivals can breathe. If the FIA allows it, rivals may have to chase. If the FIA gives a vague answer, the protests may multiply. And if the FIA delays, uncertainty becomes its own kind of damage. Uncertainty is brutal in Formula One. Teams need to plan. They need to design. They need to spend resources in the right place. They need to know whether a concept is safe before they invest weeks of factory work into it. If the line is unclear, every decision becomes harder. Do you copy the gray area and risk the FIA banning it later? Do you ignore it and risk losing performance if it is allowed? Do you protest it and risk looking afraid if it survives? Do you build a safer alternative and accept that you may be leaving lap time on the table? There is no comfortable choice. And that is exactly why a gray area can disturb the whole grid. It forces every team to make a decision before the answer is clean. That is the pressure Mercedes may have created. Not simply by finding something clever, but by forcing everyone else to react. That is power. In Formula One, the best innovations do not only make your car faster. They make rivals uncomfortable. They make them question their own reading of the rules. They make them wonder whether they have been too cautious. They make them split attention between improving their car and stopping yours. That split attention matters. A rival team focused on your gray area is a rival team spending time away from something else. They are studying photographs. They are writing questions. They are preparing arguments. They are asking the FIA for clarity. They are debating whether to copy or protest. Even if they eventually win the argument, they have spent energy fighting it. That is why gray areas are strategic weapons. They create performance on the car, but they also create pressure around the car. And pressure can be just as valuable. This is where the protest element becomes important. A protest is not just a team saying, "We are unhappy." A protest is a way of forcing the system to respond. It takes a private suspicion and turns it into an official question. It creates a record. It makes the FIA look. It tells the paddock that the issue is serious enough to challenge. That can change the entire tone of a weekend. Before a protest, a clever idea may be hidden in plain sight. After a protest, every camera looks for it. Every journalist asks about it. Every rival engineer studies it. Every lap time becomes part of the argument. That is the risk for Mercedes. If the gray area is real, and if the FIA scrutiny grows, Mercedes may have to protect the concept while defending it. That is not easy. Because defending a design often requires explaining just enough. And explaining just enough can give rivals clues. A team does not want to hand over its secret. But if the FIA needs clarity, the team may have to describe the function, the classification, the behavior, or the reason the design fits the rules. Rivals may not see the full explanation. But they may learn where to look. And in Formula One, knowing where to look can be half the battle. A camera angle. A small change between sessions. A careful phrase from a team boss. A technical clarification. A rival's protest wording. Those clues can point the entire paddock toward the sensitive area. That is the hidden cost of being challenged. Even if you win, you may lose secrecy. And secrecy is one of the most valuable things a top team has. A secret advantage gives you time. Time to develop. Time to refine. Time to build the next version. Time to make rivals chase shadows. Once the secret becomes a public debate, that time begins to shrink. This is why Mercedes, or any team in this position, would want the cleanest possible FIA outcome. A quiet approval. A narrow answer. No public drama. No broad explanation that tells rivals how to follow. But if rivals are pushing protests, quiet becomes harder. The louder the concern, the more visible the issue becomes. And once the issue becomes visible, the gray area starts losing some of its protection. That is why this first block is not just technical. It is psychological. Mercedes may have found a space in the regulations. But now the question is whether Mercedes can control the meaning of that space. They want it to mean innovation. Rivals want it to mean loophole. The FIA has to decide whether it means legal, illegal, or unclear. And the fans will decide whether it feels fair. Those four meanings are fighting each other. Innovation. Loophole. Legality. Fairness. That is why these stories explode. Because different people can look at the same idea and honestly see different things. A Mercedes engineer might see brilliance. A rival engineer might see a distortion of the rules. A driver might only care whether the car is faster. A team principal might care whether the precedent hurts future development. The FIA might care whether the written rule gives enough power to intervene. And fans might simply ask, is this racing, or is this paperwork deciding the result? That question is dangerous. Formula One wants to be seen as the ultimate racing series. But it is also the ultimate engineering series. You cannot separate the two. The fastest lap on Sunday may begin with a sentence in the regulations months earlier. That is the truth of the sport. And that truth is exactly why gray areas matter so much. The rulebook is not outside the race. It is part of the race. Every team knows that. Mercedes knows it. Red Bull knows it. Ferrari knows it. Every rival watching knows it. So when one team finds a possible gray area, the fight begins before the car even proves the performance. Because nobody wants to wait until it is too late. That is the key. Rivals do not protest only after they are beaten. They protest when they believe the beating is about to become repeatable. A one-off advantage is annoying. A repeatable advantage is dangerous. A legal repeatable advantage is terrifying. Because then the only answer is development. And development takes time. That is why the first reaction is often political. Stop it now. Clarify it now. Force the FIA to look now. Before it becomes part of the sport. That urgency reveals fear. Not proof that Mercedes has done anything wrong, but proof that rivals understand the stakes. If the gray area survives, the whole grid may need to change how it reads the rules. That is a huge consequence. Because once the line moves, every design office moves with it. Engineers who avoided that area may suddenly revisit it. Technical directors may ask why they were more conservative. Teams may redirect resources. Future upgrades may be redesigned. And a single FIA interpretation can reshape the competitive map. That is why the opening question is so powerful. Did Mercedes find something the FIA will stop? Or did Mercedes find something the FIA will allow? The first answer ends the story quickly. The second answer begins a new one. And the second answer is what rivals fear most. Because if the FIA allows it, Mercedes does not just keep the gray area. Mercedes gains validation. The team can say, the rules were checked, and we were right. That is a powerful message. It gives confidence to the garage. It gives confidence to the designers. It tells the drivers the concept is protected. It tells rivals that Mercedes read the regulations better, at least this time. And it turns the protest into proof that the idea mattered. That is the nightmare scenario for the rest of the paddock. A protested idea that survives. Because once an idea survives, the shame moves. It is no longer on the team that built it. It is on the teams that missed it. That is why rivals want to win the argument early. Not only to stop Mercedes. To avoid having to admit Mercedes was ahead in the rulebook. Because in Formula One, being ahead in the rulebook can be just as valuable as being ahead on the timing screen. That is the deeper story. The gray area is not only about legality. It is about intelligence. Who saw the opening first? Who dared to use it? Who challenged it? Who defended it? Who did the FIA support? And who now has to catch up? That is a race inside the race. A race with no podium ceremony, but enormous consequences. And this is why the next phase of the controversy matters so much. The FIA response will not just answer a technical question. It will tell the paddock what kind of boldness is safe. If the FIA shuts the door, teams learn to stay away. If the FIA opens it, teams rush toward it. If the FIA leaves it half open, the protests keep coming. That final option may be the most chaotic. Because half-open doors are exactly where Formula One teams live. They will push until the door either opens fully, or snaps shut. That is the nature of the sport. And that is why Mercedes' gray area, if it truly exists as rivals fear, has created so much tension. It challenges the paddock to decide whether this is clever enough to copy, or dangerous enough to stop. It challenges the FIA to protect fairness without killing innovation. It challenges rivals to act before they understand everything. And it challenges Mercedes to prove that its interpretation is not just fast, but defensible. That is the first major layer of the story. The cars have not even needed to settle the argument yet. The rulebook is already doing it. And in Formula One, sometimes the rulebook is the first place a race is won.